Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Emily. Thank you. I'm going to do the Bible reading today. If you can get out your Bibles, I am reading 1 Kings chapter 2. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon, his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Now you yourself know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner son of Ner and Amasa son of Jether. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood, he stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his grey head go down to the grave in peace. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. And remember, you have with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who called down bitter curses on me the day I went to Mahanaim. When he came down to meet me at Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now, do not consider him innocent. You are a man of wisdom. You will know what to do to him. Bring his grey head down to the grave in blood. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron, and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. Bathsheba asked him, "Do you come peacefully?" He answered, "Yes, peacefully." Then he added, "I have something to say to you." "You may say it," she replied. "As you know," he said, "the kingdom was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king. But things changed, and the kingdom had gone to my brother, for it had come to him from the Lord. Now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." "You may make it," she said. So he continued, "Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." "Very well," Bathsheba replied, "I will speak to the king for you." When Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to meet her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne bought for the king's mother, and she sat down at his right hand. "I have one small request to make of you," she said. "Do not refuse me." The king replied,
"Make it my mother. I will not refuse you."
So she said, "Let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah." King Solomon answered his mother,
"Why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. Yes, for him and Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah."
Then King Solomon swore by the Lord,
"May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David, and has founded a dynasty for me as promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today."
So King Solomon gave orders to Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and he struck down Adonijah, and he died. To Abiathar the priest, the king said,
Go back to your fields in Anathoth. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships."
So Solomon removed Abiathar from the priesthood of the Lord, fulfilling the words the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli. When the news reached Joab, who had conspired with Adonijah, though not with Absalom, he fled to the tent of the Lord and took hold of the horns at the altar. King Solomon was told that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord and was beside the altar. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, son of Jehoiada,
"Go, strike him down."
So Benaiah entered the tent of the Lord and said to Joab, "The king says, 'Come out.' But he answered, 'No, I will die here.' Benaiah reported to the king, 'This is how Joab answered me.' Then the king commanded Benaiah,
'Do as he says, strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my whole family of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without my father David knowing it, he attacked 2 men and killed them with the sword. Both of them, Abner son of Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa son of Jether, commander of Judah's army, were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever."
So Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, went up and struck down Joab and killed him, and he was buried at his home out in the country. The king put Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, over the army in Joab's position and replaced Abiathar with Zadok the priest. Then the king sent for Shimei and said to him,
"Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, but do not go anywhere else. The day you leave and cross the Kidron Valley, you can be sure you will die. Your blood will be on your own head."
Shimei answered the king, "What you say is good. Your servant will do as my lord the king has said." And Shimei stayed in Jerusalem for a long time. But 3 years later, 2 of Shimei's slaves ran off to Achish, son of Maachah, king of Gath, and Shimei was told, "Your slaves are in Gath." At this, he saddled his donkey and went to Achish in Gath in search of his slaves. So Shimei went away and brought the slaves back from Gath. When Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had returned, the king summoned Shimei and said to him,
"Did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you? On the day you leave to go anywhere else, you can be sure you will die? At that time you said to me, 'What you say is good, I will obey.' Why then did you not keep your oath to the Lord and obey the command I gave you?"
The king also said to Shimei,
"You know in your heart all the wrong you did to my father David. Now the Lord will repay you for your wrongdoing. But King Solomon will be blessed, and David's throne will remain secure before the Lord forever."
Then the king gave the order to Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck Shimei down, and he died. The kingdom was now established in Solomon's hands.
Wow. What a great reading. If you watch TV series, often you get at the start of an episode, you get these little glimpses of what happened in the past. Let me give you some of those glimpses of what happened last week to remind you, because this is just a continuation of a story unfolding between different characters. Last week, David was old, declining, can't even stay warm in his own bed. And his servants go out and acquire for him a human hot water bottle. Beautiful one, the best model you can find. But her job is just to keep David warm. There is no sexual relations. Adonijah, who is now next in line, according to tradition, to the throne, he sees David is weak and he teams up with Joab, we just heard about Joab, who was the head of David's army, and Abiathar, a priest, and they declare Adonijah to be king. Self-appointed king, who's ever heard of that? Nathan the prophet, Bathsheba, Solomon's mum, they have to step in. They rouse David up, they rev him up, and he finally does what he should have done, which is anoint Solomon to be the king. That had been God's choice. And so in the middle of his I'm the new king party, Adonijah hears that David has appointed Solomon as king. He freaks out. Adonijah runs to the temple, grabs a hold of the horns. We just heard someone else do that this week. And he pleads for his life. Solomon calls him in front of the throne. Adonijah appears to have humbled himself, subjected himself to the real king. Solomon shows mercy and Adonijah goes on his way. His life is spared. Some of you guys are runners, as in you go for a run for exercise. I'm not a runner, clearly. But when you come home from your run, you pull out your phone, and you look at your app, and you're like, oh, that's where I went. That's how long it took me. The path you travelled, it shows you the distance you've gone and how you got to where you are in this moment. That is the Book of Kings. It's the app for that. Mark did a fantastic job last week, and thank you, Mark, if you know he's probably out with the kids, of drawing our attention to a couple of things that are just constant themes through the writings of the kings. This is written in retrospect. Every reader of the Kings, the intended audience, knows what happened next. What they're being told is how it all unfolded. They're being shown little reasons for why it ended up, where it ended up. It is a selective, backwards-looking telling of the history of Israel, up to the point of complete collapse. It was written for an audience who knew the promises of God, and they knew the apparent just devastation of the nation. They knew that God had made promises about a king and a kingdom, a land, a nation that would be a blessing, a temple, a God who would be with them. But now they had no king, no nation, no land, no temple, and there appears to be no hope. They have serious questions about the future. They wonder if they had misunderstood everything and that God has somehow changed his mind, or maybe has turned it off and said, yeah, you know what, I've changed my plan. There's promises they made to you that's not going to work out. It is written to answer some of those questions. How did I end up here? Is there any future? Is there any hope? There is an app for that. It's the app of the Kings. Those same questions are going to be relevant this week. And I want you to note that the characters we saw last week in chapter 1, they all appear again in chapter 2. There's only one who sort of disappears, and that's the prophet Nathan. We are also going to meet some new characters. You've heard some names that you haven't heard yet, and I will introduce those to you as we go. The other thing that we'll come to those in a second. The other thing that I want you to know is that Kings gets messy. Kings reflects the messiness of life. In fact, this week was so messy, we decided not to have a dramatized reading. It would just be too messy. We are going to tackle this chapter in two sections. First, we're going to look at David's words to Solomon, and then we're going to look at Solomon's actions in dealing with Adonijah and the rest of David's hit list. As we open God's word, let me pray for us. God, we ask that you would speak through your word, not my message, but your message, that we would go away from today not the same, that our pride would be put down, our despair would be lifted up, and that your gospel of hope would speak. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, open your Bible. Track with me in 1 Kings chapter 2. The first 12 verses of this chapter reminds me, this is going to sound weird, reminds me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. No, not because of floating with bubbles in your belly and that sort of thing. If you've watched the original film of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, at the start of the film, these kids are winning golden tickets. And every time a kid wins a golden ticket, it is an amazing, special moment. They're on the brink of a new and exciting adventure. And just as the joy is bubbling out of them, the moment of innocence and joy becomes twisted and poisoned because this character shows up. Who is he? Slugworth. Arthur Slugworth. He turns up and he comes and he whispers into the ear of the child with the ticket. It turns out that he's offering them a huge amount of money if they would steal for him something out of Willy Wonka's factory. Right here, as David is dying, we have a really special moment. Father and son, dying words. Solomon is on the brink of something new and exciting. This is when you share your heart. Son, I've always loved you. I believe you can do this. Stay close to God. He will see you through. But the moment is poisoned by selfishness, by bitterness, and by instructions that political maneuvering shouldn't be forgotten, even though, keep going with the God stuff. David's words kind of come in two parts. The ways and wisdom of God, and then the ways and wisdom of man. When David is pointing Solomon towards the ways and wisdom of God, he says things like this: be strong and act like a man. In other words, show courage. Don't be timid. Observe what God has required of you. Obedience to the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper. It's not talking about you'll be rich, but this is so you'll be blessed as you rule. It will go well if you follow this path. Do this so that God keeps his promise about succession. This is a key part of following God's way, allows God's will to happen. This is good instruction. David could have and should have left it right there. But the readers of the book of Kings are going to be reading this and thinking, yes, David, this is the king that we knew. This was the guy that was the best. He was the best king. There was no bad in the king. That was our golden time. He was the best king you ever could have asked for. Or was he? Because David doesn't leave it there. He keeps going. This is his Arthur Slugworth moment. Make notes, Solomon. I have a black book. I'm going to give you some names so you can have your own black book. And he starts to give Solomon some instructions as how to deal with different characters. This is like the last will and testament of Solomon, right? To my son Solomon, I bequeath my black book and some unfinished business. Solomon, it is now your job to deal with these people. Notice the words. Remember, these readers are looking backwards across all that has happened, across the golden era of Solomon and David, and they're hearing these words. Look at verse 6 about Joab. Deal with him according to your wisdom. This is before Solomon had ever asked God for God's wisdom. Verse 9 about Shimei. You are a man of wisdom. You will know what to do with him. If that's not clear enough, bring his grey head down to the grave in blood. The writer of Kings is drawing this to our attention. Solomon, you know what to do. Hint, hint. Let's meet the characters. Let's meet Joab. Who is this guy Joab that David has just got it in for? Well, Joab and David obviously had a love-hate relationship because Joab was the long-serving leader of David's fighting forces. An absolute fighter. But David had two particular complaints about Joab. He had murdered two others in absolute betrayal. Their names were Abner and Amasa. He had murdered them out of spite, out of envy, not in battle, but in treachery. The first murder of Abner Abner had been the head of Saul's fighting forces. So Joab and he are like, generals of opposing armies. And Joab did consider Abner to be an enemy. They fought plenty during the time of war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And in one particular fight, Abner had killed Joab's brother. Now, fair enough. They're on the battlefield. It is a time of war. And they were fighting for not only their country and their general, but for their lives. But Abner later decided to switch sides and has now come across to David. And although David had accepted him, Joab had not. When Abner showed up and spoke to David about arranging a transition of power to David, Joab took him aside as if to speak to a friend, and he stabbed him in the stomach and killed him. Joab also murdered Amasa in a very similar fashion. Amasa had been the head of Absalom's fighting men. And as part of an attempt to make peace, David agreed to appoint Amasa in Joab's place as head of the army. How do you think Joab felt about that? Your replacement, young Amasa, that know-nothing who used to be a traitor. Well, let's find out. He met up with Amasa when they were supposed to be on a mission together for King David, putting down an insurrection. "How are things with you, Amasa?" says Joab. "Not too bad." They went to hug. Joab has a knife. Same deal. Signature Joab move, it seems. No one was going to be head over the army ahead of Joab. I want you to know that there was another murder that doesn't get mentioned here. Joab had murdered someone else. It was David's own son, Absalom. In spite of David's specific instructions, yes, we are fighting, yes, we are at battle with my son Absalom, but do not kill him. Spare his life. Joab hears that Absalom is hanging helplessly from a tree, dangling by his hair. What does Joab do? Takes a spear and rams it through his belly. David wanted Absalom spared. Joab doesn't care. But David doesn't mention it here. It is not his big beef with Joab. It's weird. I asked my daughter Emily to give caricatures to our two new people. Here's one for Joab. Okay. He's hard to trust. Meet Shimei. When David had to leave Jerusalem because of Absalom's threat to the throne, Shimei had come down and he meets David and his men on the road, and he starts to hurl stones and rocks at them. He picks up lumps of dirt and chucks it at them, right? It's not like life is not hard enough for these guys. And then you've got this angry man on the side of the road throwing things. And then not only is he throwing things, he's spitting insults at them. "It's your own stupid fault, David, you murderer." You've seen these people on social media, right? They're just angry, right? You've brought it on yourself. He calls David a scoundrel. And although David's men are like, "Oh, please let me at him. I can solve this in 1.5 seconds." David says, "No, don't kill him. Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to, and it may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I'm receiving today." Here's a caricature of Shimei. Right, angry man. But although David has supposedly said, "Let him be, I will suffer through it, don't hold him responsible, we'll move on and let it slide," David has not forgiven this guy. He harbors a serious grudge. In fact, he basically says to Solomon, "I can't kill this guy because I promised before the Lord that I wouldn't, but you could for me." As if that somehow makes David honourable or innocent. It is possible, to kill someone even though you're not the one who pulls the trigger. It seems that the lack of forgiveness that David holds, like he's so angry with Joab about, is now evident in David when it comes to Shimei. We're seeing the same characteristics appear on both sides of the fence. It appears that the mercy that was promised to Shimei was not mercy at all. It was just, I'll get you later. We will find out soon enough what happens to these characters, but let's pause and ask, what do we take away from these verses? What is there for us to learn? Well, we should try to take away the very thing that the authors were intending the original readers to take away. Without the book of Kings, they would have looked back at the times of David and Solomon with rose-coloured glasses. They would have longed to return to those days. Oh, for the good old days. Oh, for the best king ever. But the writer is showing them that David was actually not that great at all. Even their greatest, purest, most perfect king was neither great nor pure nor perfect. He was flawed. He was compromised. He was affected by bitterness and revenge. He was affected by failures of leadership and inability to consistently follow God's expectations of a king. He and his son Solomon effectively agreed on revenge killings. Dear reader, says the writer of Kings, when Israel was at its greatest, there was serious cracks, and they weren't very far beneath the surface. If Israel had flourished in that time, it was not because of the greatness of the king, it was because of the greatness of their God. And if God's people will ever be great, it will not be by the hand of a king, it will be by the hand of God. I wonder if you and I do this to ourselves or to others. We see someone who we think is great and we say, wow, look at that person. Or when you get up in the morning, you see the mirror and you say, wow, look at that person. But we are not seeing greatness when we look at another person or if we look at ourselves. What we are seeing, if anything is good, we are seeing the hand of God at work. Let us not fool ourselves. Even at our absolute greatest, we are not great. Our wisdom is not wise. Our goodness is not good. It is only God who is great. And the writer is going to say, look back across and see at the start of the good bit, there was stuff that was not good. I wonder where you might want to be a little bit like David, mixing following God with human wisdom. I want to give to my church because that's honouring God. And if I lie on my tax return, I can give some more. I want my business to succeed because I need to provide for my family. That is my godly responsibility. Sharp practices in my business allow me to fulfill my godly responsibilities. Or you say, I forgive you. But in your mind, you think that person really needs to learn a lesson. I will be their teacher. Will you rely on God's wisdom alone? Will you realize that blending our wisdom and God's wisdom is simply polluting something pure? You're not adding, you're taking away when we do that. Let's look at the second half of the chapter, or the second section. And so if the first part of this was like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, well, the next part of the chapter is like Game of Thrones. It starts with a new scene. In walks Adonijah to see Bathsheba. Bathsheba is now the queen mother, and there is tension and uncertainty in these times. Even as family members meet, they have to check, are you coming in peace? Should I be worried right now? Adonijah explains to Bathsheba that, I had been the king. I was there. There he is up there, king for a day. Everything had been mine. Even the people had accepted me from king, but Dad, he ruined it for me. He looks disappointed, but he sounds accepting of the outcome. Do you hear his words when he says, all Israel looked to me as their king, but things changed and the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord. There's this kind of, I know it was God's will. He seems accepting. Or is he? Do you ever get asked the question, can I ask you a favor? What is your first response? Okay, my first response is, what is it? Yeah. Will you sign this check? Well, how much is it for, right? Adonijah comes to Bathsheba and he says, I want a favor, don't refuse me. Okay, I won't refuse you. He wants Abishag for a wife. Now, this sounds weird. And I know she's beautiful, but really? Why Abishag? Well, apparently, in the ancient times, when one king conquered another, the conqueror would not only claim the land, he would claim the wives. The defeated king's wives were surrendered to the other king and the harem. You wondered why they fought so hard in battle. This is a not so very subtle way of saying, I am here. I am claiming what was David's. It is another attempt at the throne. Adonijah's humility before Solomon last week when he walked away with his life spared, it was not genuine. He was simply going back to the drawing board. His heart still seeks the throne. He will not accept God's appointed king. Despite his lip service to it, he has not accepted us. And strangely, Solomon's mum, she brings the request to him. Now, is she naive? I don't know. Is she simply siding with Adonijah so in case he wins, she's done him a favour, she won't be done in? Is she hedging? We don't know. But Solomon, hey, he's no dummy. He sees straight through it. And verse 22, you might as well just ask for the kingdom. And you might as well just, name it. Let's call it out. This is all the work of Abiathar and Joab, those conniving allies. Joab, also, if he was an Indian, he'd be called one who stabs quickly. So what does Solomon do? Okay, he does exactly what his father David encouraged him to do. He acts according to his own wisdom. His own wisdom. And I say this, not jumping to conclusions. I say this because although Solomon claimed the throne, and he claimed for himself the more righteous position, he wanted the moral high ground, there's something that we don't see. Right? There's lots of things we do see, but what are some things we're not seeing? Where are the gaps? Where is the pause for prayer? Where is the consulting of the prophet? Where is the seeking of the Lord? All we see is angry and deadly reactions. Neither is his response particularly godly. Solomon does, effectively, he appoints his own version of Joab, right? But this time the guy's name is Benaiah, aka one who stabs just as quickly. And he just goes on and kills Adonijah. And so one of the earliest acts of King Solomon is the killing of his own brother. His own brother. And he has incredible scorn for Adonijah and for Abiathar and Joab. But there is perhaps some hypocrisy present here. His methods, they look a lot like Joab, the guy who he's got it in for. Solomon banishes Abiathar as priest. He tells the priest, you should die for your treason. Abiathar has actually seen priests die for their treason. He was there when 85 priests were killed by King Saul's men for treason against King Saul. This tells me Abiathar is not only a priest who's participating in the political maneuvering, but he knows the risk he is taking. He knows the risk he is taking, certainly by siding with Adonijah, who was neither David's choice nor God's choice. And Abiathar should have known both of those things. But Solomon does hold back. He shows mercy out of regard for Abiathar's past loyalty to David and because he had the honor of carrying the Ark of the Covenant. So he's just defrocked and sent home. And we get a glimpse of, well, that was probably a wise and right response. And so we're getting this mix of, well, that was bad. Well, that seemed right. Let me tell you a story to explain the reactions of Joab. I was in Thailand once, I've only been there once, and I was up in the Golden Triangle. It's a part of the country which is known for growing huge quantities of drugs. The drugs trade was an incredible problem in the past. I expect it's still a problem, but there was a time, I was told, when the king of Thailand wanted action against the drug lords. The justice system wasn't really working for them. Everybody knew who they were, but it was very hard to bring them to justice because of evidence and so on. And so the chief of police or the chief of the army, I can't recall which, asked the king for permission, please will you let me handle it my way? I don't know whether the king was naive or he was just desperate to try something else, but he agreed. And so the police chief made a list. And they started working through their list. And they would literally just walk up to someone and say, are you so-and-so? And if the answer was yes, they were shot dead on the spot, execution style. After a very small number, and I'm talking only a handful of these execution-style killings, which came across a couple of days, the word got out very fast what was happening. And what do you think the rest of the drug lords did? Man, they ran. They absolutely bolted. And within days, literally within days, there was no drug lords left in Thailand. Joab has just heard what happened to Adonijah. Joab has just seen what happened to Abiathar, that he left with his life, but only by the skin of his teeth. And he feels like a marked man, but he hasn't got time to flee the country. And so he takes the strategy that Adonijah had taken. We saw this in chapter 1. He runs to the temple. It worked for Adonijah the first time. Perhaps it will work for Joab. He runs to the temple and he takes hold of the horns of the altar. And although there was no formal law about this, the temple was a place of holiness. The altar was a place where a substitute paid for the wrong, not the wrongdoer themselves. And the guys who are charged with killing Joab, they pause and they say to Solomon, well, he's in the temple and he's holding onto the altar and he says he's not coming out. Solomon, do you really want to murder someone in the temple? Absolutely. If he wants to die there, then he can have his wish, says Solomon. And again, we get this strange combination of an act which seems highly irreligious at the same time as Solomon claiming for himself the moral high ground. Verse 32, the Lord will repay him for the blood that he shed. He's speaking about Joab. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. It's like a curse. But on David and his descendants, e.g. me, Solomon, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. It's this kind of washing of hands. What about Shimei, the last of the people on David's hit list? What to do with him? Solomon had been told by David specifically, you know what to do? Take him down. But there was no apparent basis for killing him right now. His former acts against David, he had cursed God's anointed king. But David had apparently sworn an oath before the Lord to not kill him. And so there seems to be no apparent excuse for putting him to death right now. So Solomon instead puts him under house arrest effectively. with the very strictest of conditions. If you cross the Kidron Valley, this is what I will do. You will die. It is now your choice. Cross the line. You know what will happen. I do this to my kids. Not the threat of death. But I spell out to them, this is the behavior I expect from you. If you cross the line, this is what will happen to you. Now it's your choice. You choose the actions, you're choosing the consequence. It seems fair. But again, we're given some interesting detail in this passage. And I don't think it's a mistake that this detail is included. Solomon says, don't leave and cross the Kidron Valley, which is to the east. But Shimei's slaves ran away, and he had to go and fetch them from Gath. Have a guess which way Gath is? Not that way, it's this way. It's west. And when he's hauled before Solomon, what is the infringement that he is beaten up for and ultimately he's killed for? Is it, Solomon, you've infringed on Section 4, Part 5 of the Justice Act, under which you must abide by the terms of your community corrections order? No. David says it. Solomon says it. You know what you did to David was wrong, and now you are paying for that. It wasn't about leaving Jerusalem. That was the trigger. But the source of the anger, the bitterness, the hatred was actually that thing that was never forgiven at all. And then Solomon is once again quick to claim the moral high ground. The Lord will repay you for your wrongdoings, and the house of David and Solomon will be blessed. Wow, it's just messy. So how to apply mess? How to pick up mess out of the Bible and bring it into your life? Well, we can excuse the team. I found that on the King's website, by the way. How to apply this chapter to life. Let's go backwards through the story. Solomon, dealing with Shimei, was one of the final acts of establishing him as king. And we are now entering what some would have called the golden era of Israel. But the reader now is realizing that we entered the golden era with a king who has some serious flaws. We are building on a foundation that feels a little bit rotten. We're starting to get a realization that although Solomon has wisdom, he's rating his own wisdom. He's putting a righteous spin on stuff that is human wisdom. He did not solely rely on God's wisdom. When he cut down Joab in the temple, was he acting in righteous judgment, or was he simply eliminating a threat and using spiritual words? We're not told the answer to those questions, but those questions should be asked of ourselves. Am I in a situation where I'm tempted to dress up my motives and make them sound godly? You ever been there? Do I find myself saying what I want and then wrapping it around with spiritual words? It's easy to do. What about Adonijah? He pretended to accept God's appointed king, but in his heart, he had not accepted it at all. And in secret, his actions were different. He was planning something different. When he spoke, the right words came out, but when we see what his heart desired, it was something different. And as I invite the music team to come up in readiness for our final song, I want to ask whether you and I are too often like this. We have a God-appointed king. His name is Jesus. And refusal to act with him as king, refusal to accept his reign, it just doesn't go well. It has consequences. It is easy to pretend, and it is also easy to secretly want the throne for myself, or to want to dilute his power. You and I naturally have a desire to rule. Human wisdom would say, take control, be the boss, decide your destiny. But this chapter of Kings shows us that even the best of kings should not be the boss. Even the wisest of rulers should not take control. Being your own ruler only leads you to one of two places, either to pride, look at me, I'm the boss, or to despair. I should be doing better than this. I can't, it's not working. It is not a human king that we need. Friends, we need a perfect king. His wisdom is real wisdom. His forgiveness is real forgiveness. His justice is perfect justice. And so we need to put down our desires for the throne and give the throne back to God's appointed king. He needs to rule our heart. He needs to change our heart. True wisdom will put him on the throne. We are going to sing about that very thing, asking God to reign supreme and to exercise his rule over those parts of life where maybe you've been trying to rule alone. I'm going to take off this headset and I'm going to go step into a place that I'm far more comfortable. Excuse me while I do that.